All right. Good evening, everyone. It is 5:35 on the 8th of September, 2020. Welcome to the evening and welcome to the year, everybody in the Clarke County School District. The day went really well for anybody associated there, as it did over here, I'm glad to say. We're here for a couple things tonight. We have a brief special call session to make a minor amendment to some CARES Act dollars we allocated last month. And then we have our regularly scheduled work session where we have just two items tonight. But because we have a brief special called session, we do need a roll call, so I'll ask for that from the clerk.
Davenport.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Link.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Denson.
Here.
Harrod.
Present.
Thornton.
Present.
Hamby.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Edwards. Here.
Oh, thanks, Russell. I appreciate it. Thanks, Christine. All right. So we have a single item, which is just a small amendment, reallocation of some funds from the CARES Act allocation we made. I know Commissioner Denson, you were co-signatory on this. I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you to describe the modification.
Since Commissioner Thornton's on, I'll go ahead and let her, if she wants to take it.
Oh, thanks. Oh, I see you, Evita.
Oh yeah, I'm here. But I do want to. I am going to pass it back to Tim because he's the one who brought it to my attention, and it was supposed to be both of us. So I think it's just a minor change. Tim, if you would go ahead.
Sure, yeah, and just going back to this ordinance, we're just changing under the health allocations line, replacing Innovative Healthcare Institute and Above and Beyond with EADC, the East Athens Development Corporation, and having those fundings go to the EADC instead for COVID-related health assistance, as described in the CDO.
Thanks, Tim. Do you want to make a motion to that effect?
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and make a motion that we adopt the CDO.
I second it.
Any further questions? Question from Commissioner Davenport.
Yeah. Tim, can you explain? So we're giving money to for-profit entities.
So we're not actually. That's what this is fixing. We're instead of having the money go to what would have been for profit, this money instead is going to be going to the East Athens Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit. So this amendment is specifically to avoid having money go to for-profit businesses.
Thank you.
Commissioner Link.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and maybe the manager can step in here. These CARES money that, we supposedly were to have spent by the end of this past month and allocate by then to, is there some remaining flexibility on them as new technologies and new opportunities arise? I'm thinking of the possibility of conducting some sewage testing aimed in specific communities so we can get ahead of these infections. There's about a 2-week lag time before these infection rates actually get reported. And we can actually kind of keep track in real time and focus on particular communities and do the kind of education and individualized testing that needs to be done early. So I'm just wondering if there's a possibility for the funding that we've already gotten to be utilized for that kind of purpose.
And Commissioner, just so you know, in the work session in just a few minutes, we'll look at the prospective $15 million of additional CARES Act funds that may come to Athens-Clarke County.
That's still a May, and it could take months. Like we have no access to funds like within the next couple weeks to begin this kind of process.
So September 1st was the cutoff for that first round of funds. And I don't believe that deadline shifted at all, but Manager Williams may have additional information.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the September 1st deadline was there for Athens-Clarke County to submit a reimbursement request to the state of Georgia. and using eligible expenses as the state has dictated. And as you know, we used all of Athens-Clarke County expenditures to pull down those funds into Athens-Clarke County. So the September 1st deadline was really there for us to, provide the reimbursement justification to the state. Going forward, and as you'll see in our COVID response update, we're still working through some of the contracts on the scopes of work. Certainly, Commissioner Link, I think you've already allocated out all of these funds to various purposes. I think some of the funds were returned back to the general fund. If this body wanted to allocate, additional funds for those purposes, it certainly could. I think at this point, though, that $6.6 million has been committed at this point.
But we can talk about some further allocations in our work session. Outside of this package of funding.
That's right. Any further?
Mayor, I just want to respond to Commissioner Davenport. What we did is we went under EADC because that is the proper way, so we won't get in trouble with these funds. And I don't think it would have been possible without the attorney's office and specifically Attorney Hines that did the research and to make sure we were legal. So I do want to thank Attorney Hines for finding a way for both of these worthy organizations to get some funding.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any further questions? All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Link and a second from Commissioner Denson to adjourn the special called session. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Special called session is adjourned, and we're going to move in immediately right this moment to our work session where we just have two agenda items. One is update on all things COVID here in Athens-Clarke County, and the second is a transportation project on Jefferson River Road. So Manager Williams, I know we have some guests from the Northeast Georgia Health District, and so I want to go ahead and turn it over to you so you can introduce them because I know we've got several components of this presentation.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And if I might, I'm going to share my screen and then I'll take it back down and turn it over to our guests from the Department of Health. So what we have for you tonight in the COVID-19 update, we want to come to you each month and talk through things that are happening and hear from you what your preferences are or concerns that you need. Obviously, we're taking those concerns all the time. And tonight we thought it'd be helpful to start off with talking about the data that we're seeing. And I really appreciate the officials from the Department of Public Health here to answer any questions you may have and give us some insights. I'll talk briefly about enforcement activities, including this past weekend. Update on where we are with some of the community support activities, including Fare-Free Transit and CARES Act funding program scopes. Talk a little bit about the business support activities with the Joint Development Authority, and then start a discussion on this proposed but not yet materialized CARES Act Phase 2 funding. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to turn it over to the officials from the Department of Public Health. We have several folks with us tonight. Sarah, Emily, do you care to lead us off tonight?
I believe Dr. Goggins will take the lead on this.
Okay. So we have Dr. Stephen Goggins. Yes, sir.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everybody. Everybody's doing well, and we appreciate the chance to come and share a little bit of information. We got some questions to help frame what we're going to go over. There is obviously quite a lot that we could talk about, so we'll do a few things. I think we have a a minute or two to take some questions as well and try to get you what you need. So as far as a general overview, we are at about 283,000 cases statewide. I'm going to show you some information on that, and see if I can get that to. There we go. I hope everybody can see this. So this is statewide data, and I show it because it really shows the pattern that's happened over the summer. I think that's important context. So each one of these dots is a daily
I'm not seeing the screen. Is anybody else not seeing the screen, the shared screen?
It's here for me, Melissa.
It's showing for you? I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm seeing it too, Melissa.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah, I see it.
It just showed up for me. Thank you.
Okay, so each one of these dots is a daily point, but it's the 7-day floating average. So each day they've taken the average of 7 days of cases to come up with this. Again, this is for the state of Georgia. And so what we can see is really what we went through during the month of July and into August was a massive peak in cases compared to anywhere we had been previous to that in the epidemic. And so since then, fortunately, the state has seen a decline in overall case numbers. And so this average has begun to float down. And then you get to a place where it appears to want to start to plateau again, but we know that numbers that are in the last 2 weeks are much less firm because there is still some delay in test reporting. Just to put some absolute numbers to this, right now, Georgia is getting around an average of 2,000 cases a day. At the peak, we were nearing 4,000 cases a day. So it definitely has improved. And we will see what happens with that. Now, when you look then at our district, so the district is the 10-county area with an overall population of about 500,000 people. And so if you look at the curve, it's somewhat similar. And we've got, these are now just daily case count, but you can see that that same time period, this is back in July, we hit a peak of over 200 cases per day for the district. Since then, it has started to slide down. And then it looks like it might want to level out at this point, but this is now newer data that are harder to interpret. The good news, if we can find good news here, is this is now the same time period. So these are each individual days, and this is for the district again. This is COVID-related deaths that occurred during that time. And what I think you can see here is that we had a relatively consistent number of deaths across when it was much less COVID activity overall. And it actually stayed the same even during that very large peak. The deaths, fortunately, did not at all stay in parallel to case numbers. So we had a massive increase in case numbers, but the deaths did not increase along with that. So other things that I wanted to share with you, we continue to do 2 very large testing operations. One is permanently located in Clarke County, and one we have moved around and then to other counties in the district. And we are doing a very mobile van-based testing in partnership with UGA and starting up our own version of that to go to places that have particular need or are harder to reach or have people who have difficulty with transportation. Overall, the health district is doing about 30% of all the tests of anybody being done in the 10-county area, which is a very successful testing program, I think. We're asked about challenges that we're having with the data and with any aspect of the epidemiology investigations. So the challenge is with data, primarily about reporting. What we have noticed is that folks are getting tested at a larger number of places. A lot of them smaller urgent care centers, private offices have started to do some of the quicker resulting antigen tests. And those all require reporting by those entities into public health. And so the flow of information has gotten a lot more complicated and sometimes delayed because those entities are not used to reporting. Also on the epidemiology front, we have managed to stay up with, and I want to just point this out again, when you look at the daily number of cases, each one of these requires an investigation. We find contacts and we have to make contact with those people and educate them as well. So each one of these 200 plus cases then results in another several hundred contacts. Olivia Eccles is our district epidemiologist. There's a staff working with her of about 65 people right now, and they're staying up with this even at the peak. And that is certainly, it's been a challenge, but they're doing an incredible job with that. And then the last thing I guess I would say is that we are working to get as many contacts and as good information as we can. Sometimes people are more hesitant. They may have fears about privacy, or sometimes if there's multiple calls coming because their friend, the case may have called them, and then their doctor's office and perhaps an institution is involved. And so they may get 4 or 5 calls. And we've had people say, I know already, I've already heard that. So that can be a challenge sometimes. So we try to have to educate people about our role in the process to make them understand why they're getting that much information. And then the last question we were given was about additional steps for mitigation. There's one more, and that is back to the basics. I mean, even in this environment, it really is the basic stuff around the masking and the distancing that is the core. And anything we can do to improve adherence to that is probably the best thing that we can do as a community to try to improve the situation. Also, any encouragement of people to participate in the calls as fully as they can. And then the last thing I guess I was asked about was a relationship between the data that we have, like what I'm showing here, and what's on the UGA site. The main thing I would say about that is the UGA's data includes, when I've looked at their site, some surveillance testing specific stuff, and also some information about dog check. And dog check is a UGA system. It's voluntary reporting for a lot of things. If you are diagnosed with COVID-19, though, it's a mandatory report. So they are getting reports from anyone in their community that tests positive. And that's been very helpful, I think, for a lot of purposes, but it definitely helps augment the information that we collect. So there looks at the same thing, but because it is personal reporting on the dog check side, it would be a little different. It could include people, for instance, at another campus that we wouldn't see here. It could be somebody who's taking online classes and they're at home. And so there again, they wouldn't be in our district data. So we'll stop at that point and see if there are a question or two.
I have lots of questions.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Okay, first of all, this chart we're looking at it ends August 31st. So there's more than a week worth of testing reports that are not included on this chart, and those reports include like unprecedented record reporting. Over 200 cases in one day, 150 cases in a couple days. Our chart now looks like a spike, like a rocket launcher spike. And that's data that's not even complete yet. We can only see that spike getting higher as more reports come in and they're backdated. And it's clearly driven by the college age bracket. We've seen the demographic data now, and thank you to our local health department for reporting that. Because that's not been the case. We've only in the past 3 or 4 weeks or so been able to look at the demographic data for our own county and our own particular region. We've only seen statewide data up until now. And that statewide data has never included Hispanics. It's only, I mean, it's included Asian American and Pacific Islanders and all these other racial demographics, but it's never included Hispanics. Apparently those are folded in with Caucasian, but from the data that we're seeing locally, that does portion that out. The infection rate among our Hispanic population is 3 times what's typical of other populations. There's a serious crisis in that community, and I don't think any of us are aware of it. And so I think that, you know, we as policymakers need to come up with a better means of reaching that community, and we need to enter into some kind of conversation with UGA about what the hell is going on campus. Because it's becoming crystal clear, and I'm not the only one who's seeing this. I have people way above my pay grade are declaring this as well. It's becoming crystal clear that they're essentially going for herd immunity among students. And, you know, only 0.2% or so of folks in that age category are going to see any serious symptoms from COVID. So, you know, they figure the students can weather this infection and, you know, damn to the rest of us who might come in contact with them and get sick. And, you know, God knows what's going to happen to their parents and grandparents when they go home to visit. So I'm asking this body to put down our feet and reach out to UGA and sit down at a table and figure out what their strategy is to contain the infection in that population and what we can do to assist with that strategy, because we are now number 5 in the nation for rapidly growing caseload. Athens, Georgia appears as number 5 on the New York Times COVID tracker as a national hotspot for COVID infections. And we should have gotten ahead of this ball, you know, and there's only so much we can do as a local government when you have an entity, you know, with 30, 40,000 walking COVID clouds amongst them. But we've got to make that outreach and come up with some means of getting a hold of this. And other communities are doing it, and they're working together with the universities in their communities.
And Melissa, I'm sure you saw in the New York Times, there's a host of other college communities, including Statesboro here, Georgia, Pullman, Washington, Oxford, Mississippi, that are kind of high on that list too. Yeah. This is clearly a dynamic that's nationwide at the moment. Other questions for Dr. Goggins?
Kelly, I had a follow-up on that. Dr. Goggins, I am a little confused on as Commissioner Link brought up on that graph. If I can bring up and share content on your own website, we have the updated graph through today. So I think this is much better and much more applicable for us to be discussing here, which has those that last week that Commissioner Link brought up, which definitely shows a different picture. And so, yeah, I mean, this is on the actual publichealthathens.com website right now. I'm pulling this from. And same thing with the deaths. We've seen a big pickup in the last week of confirmed COVID-related deaths also. So I think this just gets, to me, definitely some of my frustration of the problem with correct data getting to this body, but also therefore getting to the public, as the public, of course, is watching this right now. And I understand that it's a lot of different institutions, you know, ships passing in the night sometimes, but we've got to do better at it. And I would definitely hope that presentations such as this, we'll be getting the most up-to-date data, especially when it's available on our on your own website. So with that there, I do have a clarification question with the UGA reporting. I understand that the dog check not being folded into the numbers for the reasons that you pointed out. But for the UGA's surveillance numbers that you brought up, are those being folded into the numbers that are being reported by the Department of Public Health now?
Yes. So any positive that's reported to us is put into that. And UGA as a testing entity, which would be surveillance or what they do at the University Health Center, they would report that like another testing entity, and it would come in to us that way. The other cases that are represented on dog check should come in as well if they're from testing entities in the community, for instance. They would come there. It's just important that they not be seen as things that you would add together, but dog check is one version of looking at the positives, and the things that are reported to us is another version of it.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is, with I guess to epidemiologists studying this, and we've seen a number of analysis actually released by UGA professors and researchers showing a potential exponential increase in cases here, and looking at these numbers through August 30th that they're showing through UGA's reporting. I guess we should be getting that new report soon for last week. But then also looking at the Department of Health numbers, these numbers that we're seeing here with by far our highest reported date, nearly at 300 cases. I think actually what the three highest reporting dates we've had in the last 8 or 9 days here. It seems like a lot of those analyses are unfortunately being proven correct. From Department of Health's research and epidemiologists working on this, are we expecting further increases here? Is that likely? What are we looking at from what we've experienced in this past week? What do y'all feel like that's going to show here in the next coming weeks?
So a couple things.
I'm sorry, Dr. Goggins. I just wanted to remind you about your 6 o'clock meeting.
Actually, that's probably what this is right now. Thank you for that. So the question was just about what we're expecting. I think actually it is quite possible that I don't know what to expect because there's so many variables, but let me just tell you a couple of considerations. One is that we've seen, even if we don't think about it this way, our baseline has increased. Our population from which we're drawing the cases has increased dramatically over a short window of time. And so that I think alone would produce a rise. And so it is yet unclear to me if that is a rise that's going to be a trend or if it's a rise that will be a new plateau. I will say that in these particular cases, and I apologize that I did not have the newest one of these. I thought that I did, but if I didn't, I'm sorry about that, and obviously I did not. I am aware that 2 of these days were, we'll call it data dump. So we had a particular testing entity that had batched up several hundred positive antigen tests and dropped them at over a very short period of time. And so that really, in total, we got several hundred added in here. And that's part of what made the spike look like what it did. That's not to say that this isn't actually a higher area, but the particular spike day that you're looking at, I think, is in part reflective of that. So I hope that answers at least part of the question. I would love to be able to predict exactly what was coming, but those are some of the things I think about.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, seeing as Commissioner Link brought up, the increases that we're seeing in college cities, not just here in Georgia, but across the entire nation for, again, like you said, that baseline increase because of students coming in. Is the Department of Health, are y'all giving recommendations and input to the Board of Regents and making recommendations on activity that they should be following?
We are working very closely at a lot of different levels. I know that the commissioner works at the Board of Regents level. We are working at the district level with UGA and a lot of other institutions as well on sharing of information, talking about plans and responses, and really, I think, are partnering very closely on the response. We don't make specific recommendations on operations like that. We give them information and share ideas, but ultimately the decisions on operational changes go to the institutions. That's just the way that this has been set up across the state. That's not just true of UGA, it's all K through 12 and higher ed institutions.
Okay.
So I
Thank you, Dr.
apologize.
Goggins.
I do have to go to another Board of Health meeting. So I'm going to have to exit at this point, but I'm happy to come back and answer because I know there are more questions.
Thanks, Dr. Goggins. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
There's from the Board of Health who had additional material, or we're going to move on to the next component, Blaine?
I think we're going to move on. And I want to thank everyone from the Department of Health for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
The next data points we want to share is regarding our own employee exposures. And I'd like to ask Assistant Manager Josh Edwards to talk about that. He's been working with Human Resources to track this closely.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioner. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. We wanted to, we were sharing data on the community, and we also wanted to share data on our employees as we've approached this. As you can see, this is the 25th week of our response to COVID-19. We have prioritized employee safety as an organization. And to do that, it's been very important to track the number of exposures we see per week across the organization. So this chart shows you that number, and our risk management department has been running point on working with individuals who have been exposed and making sure we're documenting and working with their departments to explore who else might have been exposed if they end up being a confirmed positive. Much like we saw from Dr. Goggins' data and DPH's data, we had a huge spike in July, which followed the July 4th holiday. So those 2 weeks after the July 4th holiday, much like our community, we saw it. And ever since then, it's been coming back down. I think one thing that's been reassuring as we've watched this number, though it's still very high, we've seen that we haven't had the same jump since the students have been back as the community numbers. So we do feel like our employee exposures are plateauing. And so we continue to monitor that weekly, and we're making decisions based on this data. One thing we did before the July spike was we created a Keep It Safe team, which is liaisons from every department who are meeting and talking through cleaning and safety protocols on the department level and communicating down throughout the organization. So we're really working hard on internal communication and making sure that each person that's been exposed is talking with risk management and understanding expectations and how we can help.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So my question, looking at this graph at the moment, the blue line is the exposure count and the kind of brownish orange color is the new cases. As I look at the graph, basically from the middle of March till about the end of June, those two lines more or less track each other. And then by the time we get to early July, the gap between the exposure count and the new cases, it's really large in that sort of, third week is that of July. But it's a much bigger gap between the two lines after the beginning of July than it was up to the beginning of July. Do we have any understanding of why that might be?
Yes, Commissioner Harrod, I can answer that. It's not a perfect science, but what the data is telling us is, as we've progressed in COVID-19 as a community, our employees, we're seeing more positives. So early on, there was exposures, but very few of those employees were actually confirmed positives. And so once they got a test, they actually came off as an exposure. So the difference between the exposure count and the new cases is every week we're getting a certain number of new cases, but the exposure count represents the total number of employees that are still in isolation. because they might be exposed. So that number is typically always bigger. But in July, as you see the bigger difference, that is because people were staying in the exposure count more than just 1 week. You know, if you're a positive, obviously you're quarantining and you're going to be on this for multiple weeks and not come off until you've been through that quarantine. So that's the difference here. We've seen more confirmed positives starting in July than we did prior. And just if I could give you one quick example, the last week shown here, 8/30, we had 15 new exposures, but we had 24 exposure counts. So what that means is that 9 of the exposures from the previous week rolled over, and we're still part of the number.
Josh, can you talk about?
Okay, but it says new COVID exposures per week at the top, not. It doesn't say that it's a rolling number. It says new exposures per week.
No, it's not rolling, Commissioner Harrod. So the exposure count is the number of current employees that are in isolation or have been exposed, right? So the new cases is in that given week, but some people don't come off of that number until their isolation is over, and that could be more than 1 week. So eventually everybody comes off. It's not accumulative.
Josh, could you talk a little bit about how this is differentially hitting different departments or divisions? I mean, what are the departments that seem most heavily impacted?
Sure. So the departments that have seen the highest impact have been typically are some of our public safety. So the sheriffs and the police department have had some of the highest number of exposures. Public utilities, transit, and central services included in that. So what we're seeing is public safety and some of our frontline. But the other thing here is that not all these exposures are at work, and in general, what we see is the majority are at home or from family members. So this is what makes this so hard, is that it's very rare that there's a big number of employees that are exposed at work. We've had a couple of examples of that, but that is not the majority of cases. What we typically see is a family member, someone spent time with, who ends up testing positive, and so that person quarantines until they get their test back. And if they, obviously we contact the employees they've spent a lot of time with, if that's the case. But oftentimes that's kind of how this happens, and we haven't seen many cases where other employees have gotten it from have been exposed from their coworkers.
Thanks. Melissa, you had a question for Josh?
Yeah, well, it's reassuring, I guess, to know that they're not being exposed on the job. And I do have a question about protocols in ACC properties as far as requiring folks to wear masks when they enter enclosed, unventilated spaces like restrooms and elevators and kitchenettes and stuff like that. Even if there's no one else in there, there seems to be a lot of misconception that if you're in a room alone, it's okay. But those clouds of virus stay suspended in the room. So I just want to make sure that we're communicating clearly with our employees that, there's still a high risk of exposure in these enclosed, unventilated spaces, even if you're alone. If other people have been coming in and out of those spaces, I want to make sure that we're communicating how this virus actually is transmitted and is how people can catch it, even if they're not face-to-face exposed. Mm-hmm. Is that being communicated to folks?
We can make sure to do that, and we're using the Keep It Safe team to communicate all sorts of aspects like that. We've got a website as well. We've set up very early on in this process a hotline and an email address for employees to anonymously share information if they feel unsafe in their work environments, if there's things happening that need to be corrected. So we're trying everything we can to get information from employees if they don't feel safe and to make changes, and we'll make sure to highlight that. We have talked about HVACs and the importance of adjusting those and how there are particles in the air, but we can make sure to emphasize that, Commissioner.
Even getting a fan in some of these rooms just to disperse those clouds. I mean, of the dozen or so people that I personally know who've gotten COVID, at least 3 of them have gotten them in empty rooms or elevators, restrooms or elevators. I mean, that, and I think that's something that people don't realize. You know, you can catch this virus in an empty room. Has been in there who's had it, and the air has not been properly dispersed. I also there's something else I wanted to ask about our employees, and it slipped my mind. But maybe it'll come back. Thank you.
Other questions for Josh? All right, Josh, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Tom, I had one real quick. Sorry to interrupt. Mary Gertz. Josh, in some of those closed spaces, I've read where studies prove that the presence of a plug-in HEPA filtration, plug-in HEPA filter with even a UV light can help cycle air and prevent and take out some viral laden aerosol particles. Is that, what do you think about that in some of those areas where we don't have a window that can be open to provide fresh air, or, meeting rooms indoors, just wanted to throw that out there for y'all.
Yeah, Commissioner Edwards, we've read the same thing. Some of our departments have bought those, and I know one idea that has been thrown around by directors is, anywhere where we're interacting with residents who are paying bills or coming into our facilities, it makes sense to try to put one of those HEPA filters there as well. So I know there are some departments that have invested in that. We're definitely encouraging that and sharing that as an idea, but I think you're right on that one, sir.
And I think the more we can encourage people to have meetings outdoors at a picnic table or whatever, the better, because we just know that outdoors is the safest place to be. I know we have a retreat coming up this Thursday, and we have to sign this waiver to go into the Classic Center. But and I meant to mention this to Mayor Gertz or Manager Williams. I'm glad we're having this meeting. But any time we can break out and meet outside on Thursday and Friday sure would be nice, because it's hard to communicate with a mask on. You can't see facial expressions or body language. So I know it's difficult for people, but the weather's getting a little milder, so outside sure is a safer spot. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor and Commission. So talk a little bit about enforcement, and I've got reports from the last couple of weekends on bar occupancy checks, and I'll talk about face mask enforcement as well. Weekend of August 29th, we had 69 bar occupancy checks by the police, and all bars were compliant. This past weekend, there were another 73 bar occupancy checks. All bars are compliant there as well. So we've done close to 400 bar occupancy checks here within the last couple of months. With face mask enforcement, the last couple of weekends, Chief Spruill has pulled in additional officers for downtown, which of course, impacts the rest of Athens-Clarke County. But they speak to groups that are standing outside businesses. They seek to have folks voluntarily comply with wearing the face mask, and they distributed about 600 masks that particular weekend. Only one citation was written that weekend, who continued to really not follow directions from the officers. The next weekend, Chief Spruill brought in even more additional officers and distributed close to 1,000 masks to residents who didn't have them. Numerous warnings were issued, 13 citations were written, so we've got 14 to date, and they've distributed almost 1,700 masks through our police department. And the report was, except for the 14 citations here between the last 2 weekends, most folks were compliant. and readily accepted the mask. Yes, Commissioner Link.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank ACCPD for stepping in for that enforcement. I drove through downtown late at night, one night each of these past 2 weekends, and I was actually shocked to see that there seemed to be some widespread compliance, and the lines outside of these bars were somewhat distanced, and I actually slept those nights. So that's great. But I also feel like, we don't necessarily need our cops to do this enforcement. And maybe we could do like Savannah has done and come up with a team outside of our police force that be available to hand out those masks, to just remind people to pull them up, and not request actual enforcement until it's necessary. I think that most of these folks just needed a reminder. I witnessed our police officers just, kind of waving at people and gesturing to pull their masks up, and then that was enough. So I don't think we need to pull from our police force for some of this enforcement. That we have departments that are unable to conduct full business because of this pandemic. Maybe we can put some of those folks to work on this kind of stuff.
Well, I think that we certainly could, look at an alternative, and certainly the police would welcome that. I do want to say, Commissioner Link, that there are no employees that are currently paid that aren't working, and so we've got them doing different things. It would just involve. I noted in the Savannah article that you shared that it was actually done through the tourism office.
Yeah.
But we can look at using employees for that. It's just that they won't be doing the jobs that they were hired for at that point.
Maybe we could hire some new folks, because this is really a priority, and I fear that, if we, I don't like the idea of there being a police presence on every corner downtown, and I don't think but some enforcement is necessary, and I think we can kind of be a little more friendly about it. And if we need to invest in those folks, let's do it.
Manager Williams, I appreciate this update. I think this is going fine. I salute the police for taking on this task during this crisis, to distribute almost 1,000 masks. I am glad to see that they're not hesitating to issue a citation when necessary. That's why we enacted this ordinance. In the absence of any sort of enforcement mechanism, we wouldn't have a leg to stand on here, and we would be in much worse shape. So I don't see any need for any drastic changes at this time. I'm going to disagree with my colleague, Commissioner Link. This looks solid to me. We have some citations that have been written. We have a pretty robust record of bar occupancy checks. We've distributed almost 1,000 masks. Again, I would just reiterate, with this issue, my utmost concern is for our frontline employees. I don't want any police officer to contract the coronavirus while doing these bar occupancy checks. So I want continued reassurance that our employees are kept as safe as possible when doing this. And I salute the work that they've done so far. These numbers look good to me.
Thanks, Russell. Callie?
I think Commissioner Harrod has hand up, Mayor.
Go ahead, Andy.
Well, just to say, I also commend what ACCPD has been able to do in the downtown area, and I agree with Commissioner Edwards. I certainly don't want any of our officers being put in a position where, they're exposed to this virus because they don't have the proper equipment or protective things. But I do have a couple of really they're kind of questions. So the first is, I can imagine that this does get somewhat tiring for our police officers doing this. Is this something that, as a way to possibly give them something of a break, that we could work with the sheriff's office, that they could maybe also participate in this? I understand that the sheriff's a constitutional officer and we can't force them to do that, but I don't know if there's been any outreach to the sheriff's office on this. The second thing I would want to say, although I think that the bars, there are a lot of bars downtown, and we do know that that bars are super spreader locations, but not all of the bars and drinking establishments more generally in Athens are downtown. And are we doing similar kinds of things in some of the other non-downtown locations that also have bars and large numbers of people congregating?
Thank you, Commissioner Herod. And Chief Sproul is at a community meeting tonight. Otherwise, he'd be here. And we do have Officer Radford on the line. But I would say that we're certainly not bringing this level of focus, but we do. The police department does administer fairly across the board. As far as bar occupancy checks, I'd have to find out how many have been done outside of the downtown area. But I will follow up with that, sir.
It's super, because I went past, I forget when it was now, last weekend, sometime in the evening, or it might even been during the day, I can't remember now, but there was a bar on Gaines School Road that it didn't look like there was much social distancing going on to me.
Okay. That's noted. Okay. Moving on to community supports.
I have a question, a statement. I want to support Commissioner Harrod's idea about the Sheriff's Department, but also can we consider our code enforcement and our fire department, especially on the occupancy issues? Those are under our purview. So maybe we could solicit their help in some of this monitoring and not put everything on the police department. So it's not even a question, it's just a suggestion.
Yes, ma'am. That's a good one. I have been talking to our building inspection and fire about augmenting the police efforts downtown. Okay. Moving on to supporting the community, there's a number of things to get you updated on in the public. The mask distribution update, that was something early on that you felt was very important, that make sure everybody that needed a mask had a mask. And there's been several waves of these in the last couple of months where we've got almost 75,000 distributed. Most of these have been delivered within a week of receiving them. And as you can see here, you had asked that we, leverage our partner organizations in the community. And in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that just over 2/3 of the masks were distributed via these partner organizations. In wave 3, that included, internally leisure services, transit, public utilities, and police. 1,000 were given to the UGA mobile lab as well. Mercy Health Center, the Council on Aging, the Clarke County School District, Family Promise, the Homeless Shelter, EADC, Casa de Amistad, Salvation Army, Action Inc., Athens Land Trust, the Habitat for Humanity, Advantage, and then even internally providing some masks as well. With Wave 4, the school district, the Chamber of Commerce, the police department are other ways that we're trying to get those out there to different segments of the community. So that's going very well. Athens Eats Together was an award that you not only did during resiliency package, but also during the CARES Act distribution, and all those contracts are being looked at now, and we are being careful to have performance metrics on the distribution there. So numbers of meals, people served, geographically, demographically on a weekly basis, so we can keep you abreast of how that's going. The Council on Aging is augmenting some of their staff with some bilingual intake specialists to help applicants, get into the system. Community Corps update. The Workforce Development Coordinator has been hired, started work today. As you know, the Economic Development Department's been really focused on the Joint Development Authority, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but they hope to pick up momentum this coming week. They're finalizing the job descriptions, and we're ordering the lead items for the hand tools that they'll need to do their work.
Manager Williams,
yes.
Could you refresh my recollection? What kind of work are they going to be doing with those hand tools?
Well, it's going to be a variety of projects that we'll have departments submitting. I know right out of the gate that sustainability, that we'll have them doing work, on in the community, removing invasives, things of that nature to get things going.
Cool.
This is a crew, and then we'll have a supervisor as well that will be hired. And so that's where we're going to start, but we have lots of other ideas and want to get other ideas from departments as well.
Like clearing invasives out of the greenway, that sort of thing?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Madam, I'm sorry. Manager Williams, I think this is a start. Has your office started thinking, or could your office started thinking about managerial trainings and opportunities for people to move up in administrative and directorships? I like this idea, but I hope that we can think out of the box so we can diversify our departments as far as directors and supervisors. So maybe some grow your own leadership and I don't even want to say a long-term goal. I would say a short-term goal to address the area that we are. We definitely could use.
So we very much are looking at this program as a grow your own, so to speak. And one of the ideas we discussed was, maybe once every couple of weeks, doing tours of different departments, familiarizing what careers with the unified government may look like as we get to know these folks over a year's time, and encouraging them to apply for various positions, depending on what their interests are first and foremost, and experience would support. So yes, we very much will be looking at these folks closely.
Well, maybe I didn't make myself real clear. I welcome these people coming on board and having that opportunity, but I'm also looking at people who are already in some of these positions that may already know what departments look like, that we create a grow your own for people to move up in some of these managerial positions. I think that was my point.
Okay. Well, we do engage in succession planning to some degree, and we're continuing to work on that. And certainly our Innovation Ambassadors program, where we engage folks from across the employees from across the organization and give them the opportunity to hear more, learn more, and give more input, has certainly been a great opportunity for people to see more and move up. And we've hired some of those folks as department directors, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to transit. I had some conversations, Commissioners Hamby and Denson, and just the $150,000 was intended to go totally fare free till the end of the year, and that's what we will do. I did want to take the opportunity to let you know that, of course, pre-COVID, we were averaging about $2,600 of fare per day. And where we're at now with COVID, as you know, the ridership is down. We're about $1,000 per day. And so, your action will enable this to continue to go fare free. But with what we've started this year, we are at a deficit with the fare box revenues at about $226,000. Okay, with the CARES Act, a few weeks ago that you passed, we have been working with the agencies you indicated on their scopes, and that's what's being worked on and contracted now. And I know Assistant Manager Deborah Lunnan has been working with Assistant Attorney Hines, as well as our HCD Director Banerjee, on these. And you can see some of the scopes that are coming out, and certainly things that are needed in the pandemic. And it ranges from rehousing, emergency shelter, telehealth. You have taken care with the Commissioner Thornton's commission-defined option this evening, the issue with for-profit with the award to EADC. There's food assistance, testing equipment. As I go through here, indigent care, and as we have talked to these agencies, they have come up with different ideas, and there's been some flexibility in trying to work through it. And I really appreciate all the work staff and the attorney's office has put into this. I know that Habitat had changed and wants to partner with some of the healthcare providers for more testing and prevention, and a van to be used by the indigent care providers, and then more assistance for those vulnerable populations that are probably feeling this the worst right now. Yes.
I have a quick question. When will these agencies be seeing these funds? From what I understand, they haven't actually been distributed yet.
Well, we couldn't distribute it until we actually knew what their scope was. And so we've collected their scopes, and I think, we're using an expedited form. Everybody gets the same type of form. We're baking that in there. And I think you've already made the award, so we don't need to come back to the mayor and commission. And it's really just, I think we're at a point to send all the contracts over to the agencies this week.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Blaine, just real briefly on that, just as agencies have a formal application process in place for the support areas that they're concerned with, can we just make sure that that's updated on our resident resources subpage on our website? I know that's something that we've been adding to, but I just want to make sure that there's a single landing page where, with the public funds we've directed, we can tell folks, whether it's food need or whether it's utilities need or other things, that there's one-stop shopping for information.
Of course.
Thanks.
Okay. And, Mayor, I think you were at the meetings last week with the Joint Development Authority. But there was a webinar at the end of the month to train community volunteers to help small businesses with their applications. Of course, you approved the intergovernmental agreement last week, and I think the JDA agreed to that at their meeting the next day last week. They've partnered with First American Bank to administer and service the loans, which has been a real help, and we appreciate their assistance with that. The grant application and loan application is live right now. It's going to be open for the next 2 weeks. And we have that on our website, and I can certainly send that link to all of you so that you can help guide folks there. And Mayor, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, just as you can see here, there's sort of a 2-week window for application. Following that 2 weeks, we probably will evaluate the program, and there may be some program modification following that, should there be funds available. And certainly with the next round of CARES dollars that we'll talk about, it wouldn't surprise me if the JDA makes further requests to the unified government. So, Melissa?
Yeah, I have some concern about one of the qualifications to even apply for these funds is you must be a small business of 10 employees or less, which pretty much disqualifies any food service business unless you're a really, really tiny kind of family-owned operation. I mean, that concerns me, because some of the businesses that have been most impacted by this pandemic have been, those food service and bar businesses. Is there anything, and I have not looked at the application in depth yet, Is there anything in that application that gives some weight to the level of impact that your particular business is seeing?
That is a component of the application. You have to demonstrate you've been impacted by COVID. And so you have to show disparity between your prior earnings and your earnings within the pandemic period. I will note that part of the goal of JDA was to really target those entities for whom EIDL or PPP were not easily accessed, which is why, at least in this first application window, we started with those very small businesses.
Okay,
But,
so those businesses didn't qualify for some of those earlier federal funding mechanisms at all because they were so small.
That's right.
Okay. Well,
I will say some very small, some sole proprietorships from individual businesses did access those, but, we find that historically, you find those very small folks are either unbanked or underbanked, may not have had a financial provider to whom they could turn for the assistance, for example.
How did you come up with the 10? And I understand that maybe you could have more than 10 employees if, some of them were not full-time. Is that based on like employee hours to that make up for 10 full-time employees? Is that?
So that's 10 based on your occupation license.
Okay.
And so I think this has demonstrated that, we probably in the future in our finance department generally also need to give some specific guidance to businesses. For example, we've already found that there are some who were claiming to have employees when really what they had were independent contractors, and they were just 1099ing people. So I think this has demonstrated some broader community need and community education. But again, this is the first 2-week window model, and then it would not surprise me to see sort of a wider expanse of opportunity beyond that.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you.
I'm also interested in Commissioner Link's concern. I did not know if that 10 was some regulation from the state or federal government. It was just our choice.
That's right.
Okay. And is this, and all these pots of money floating around, not floating around, I didn't mean to say that so lightly. Is there a deadline that these JPDA dollars have to be spent? Is there a deadline like the CARES package or not?
The funds have already been delivered to the JDA, and then comparably, you might remember we also introduced some funds for grants to the Northeast Georgia Business Alliance. And so for the JDA, the first round of individual applications closed on September 22nd, but if funds remain, there will be another round, again, with some of the prospective updates we've talked about.
But is the JDA under that same December the 31st deadline or December deadline?
Yeah, I think that'd be a question for Dan McRae, who's been our outside counsel, is what would be the last date by which JDA would have to deliver funds to the individual business. I couldn't answer that for you right now, Commissioner, but I can find out a little more information about that.
I would appreciate that because we discussed with the CARES package. I'm sorry if my dogs bark. We discussed with a CARES package a check-in time in October. So that's why I'm asking that question. But anything you can get back with me will be fine. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, that goes to CARES. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, quick question, Mr. Mayor. Throughout this sort of process, we've been discussing how some businesses, the employees of some businesses in town have been left high and dry by virtue of being paid under the table, so that there's no quarterly payroll reports for them to submit to the Department of Labor to get unemployment. Are we going to be screening for that type of behavior with these grants, where you might have a business that, say, only has one paid employee on the books, so they're eligible for this under 10 employees grant, but in fact they employ many more people under the table. Is there any way we can screen for that?
I don't know that we absolutely can keep bad actors out, but one thing that I've noted just in thinking about all of the prospects for, how we ensure that the fair actors are the ones getting funds is that if somebody is playing fast and loose with number of employees, they're probably playing fast and loose with the income that they've accounted for too. So again, is there a perfect way to do this? Probably not, but that may be something of a governor.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks.
On that note, just to piggyback, hey, it's Allison. That might be something that we can talk to our legislators about. Maybe ways that we are able to get an idea of reality checking, whether they have to turn in their previous year's tax form or something, or Department of Revenue. I don't know, those kind of things. But I do want to help who we can help. And if I recall, our occupational tax, I think the first category is 1 to 2 employees, and the next category is 2 to 10. So I think that, if I'm correct, Blaine can correct me, I think that's that next bracket. And then the next bracket goes much larger. So
I think maybe the 50, yeah.
Yeah, so that might be the reason that we ended up also with that 10 and under, because it's a set bracket on the occupational tax. Russell might know that as well, but
the consideration.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that's been going on, and this summary that we're getting tonight is only like the cap of it, but I do appreciate all the depth of work that's been happening behind the scenes for that as well.
Manager Williams, I had a quick question for you on the CARES Act funding. Will those entities that have been approved in that previous few slides that you just displayed, are they going to be receiving an approval notification so that they can go ahead and get going on their projects, or how is that going to work? When will they be notified so that they can go ahead and start deploying these funds to serve the community?
Yes, well, we'll of course give them a copy of the signed contract, and then for those that want some, if they got reimbursements on hand, go ahead and present those, and then the others we can distribute the funds according to the planned scope. And we're also working with them to kind of, as we said at the meeting hosted by Commissioners Hamby and Thornton, we want to see their planned cash flow, if you will, with an October check-in to make sure that things do get spent in advance of the December 30th deadline.
Okay, so maybe the guidance would be to contact your office for that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Haley Banerjee and Deborah Lawnon, Assistant Manager Lawnon, and Sherry Hines have all been actively communicating with these folks.
Sure, yeah. So, but the money is now approved for these entities to now spend.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the period of time, I believe, goes from March 1st to December 30th. So even if they've already spent some funds and they can present those, that's fine.
Okay.
As long as it meets the scope that they are committing to. Okay.
The scope listed here in the notes column.
Yes, and then this is summarized here, but yes, that there's a specific scope that'll be in the contract so everybody understands what their responsibilities are.
Okay, thanks.
And we'll be reporting on the progress on that hopefully over time.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Harrod?
Thank you. Just very briefly, I wanted to just follow up on what Commissioner Edwards mentioned a few moments ago about the issue of bad actors, and this is particularly given some recent legal activity that we were involved in, or litigation, I should say. So I'm assuming though that anybody that is coming wanting money would have to prove how many employees they had before they were given any money. In other words, showing up with their books and et cetera. Is that correct?
That's right. Their business occupation paperwork as well as their Department of Labor reports.
So in other words, if they've been paying people off the books, they're going to show up with a relatively small number of apparent employees, even though that's a smaller number than possibly their real numbers. Is that correct?
If someone was doing that, that's right.
Okay, moving on to CARES Act funding phase 2, which, let's be clear, it's not been announced. We only have indications this might happen. But as you know, we were in a bit of a crucible here to meet the state's deadline of September 1st to get expenses committed. And so I just really wanted to start the conversation, and we don't have to finalize. We certainly don't have to figure this out tonight. I just wanted to say that we did successfully draw down 100% of all of phase 1 that was available to Athens-Clarke County. Doing the math backwards, we were told phase 1 was 30% of the total. So that would indicate that there's $22 million we could potentially receive. The only thing that we've really heard about phase 2 is that it may come in 2 increments of the remaining 75%, 35%, and 35%. They were supposed to have a meeting last week, which was canceled. We're hoping it will occur this week. There's any number of things. Certainly, you have indicated some things with the CARES Act phase 1 awards that you wanted to see. There's any number of things. Broadband has become a very hot topic for our school district and for people that don't have it. You may consider some large amount of funds to go and augment the TSPLOST project, which is really meant to stand up the infrastructure, but not a full-on ISP. It gives us the ability to evolve to that. I know that that's just one idea. I know the Classic Center, we were meeting with court representatives. We think that Judge Melton is about to have another order that's going to ask that jury trials resume, and in order to spread out and be safe, Judge Norris has asked for some alternative space. We were currently looking at the Classic Center. It could be that some of the funds are used to provide that space during COVID for extra court space. And of course, we've gotten a lot of interest from the community since the first award of things that folks would like to see. So we haven't heard anything. It may not come to fruition. I just wanted to encourage y'all to begin talking and thinking about that. And certainly we can do any research you want us to find out about need.
I have a question or an idea.
Thanks, Commissioner. And I'll just say, kind of as we begin as part of the conversation, I'm very interested in having commissioners articulate any thoughts they have about where, should these funds be realized, as I certainly hope they will, they might go. So that way we've got opportunity for any research or any planning that would be part of that. But go right ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, I'd like us to enter into some kind of conversation with Dr. Aaron Lipp with the College of Public Health and implement a plan for sewage testing of particular neighborhoods, even particular apartment complexes, so we can get ahead of this pandemic. Her data shows, it can almost show in real time almost the outbreaks. What we're seeing with the data coming in from the DPH is often a 2-week lag time. By then it's too late. By the time folks even get their test results back, that they've already exposed half a dozen other people or more. But if we can get ahead and target particular communities, particularly our vulnerable communities, the communities where people are possibly less likely to get tested because they don't have access to the health insurance or they're working all the time. I did send a message out to our housing authority folks to see if we could, get a kickstart there. But Dr. Lipp is supposed to be sending me a brief presentation that I'll forward out to the rest of you. And if we could start this immediately and with the idea that we could get reimbursed through CARES Act funding, if we could enter some partnership with our public utilities folks who can, enter those sewage cleanouts, which are public infrastructure often, then we can hopefully get some control and some idea of how this pandemic is raging beyond campus and into our population, of which we have a lot of vulnerable folks who are not likely to fare so well as your typical 20-year-old college student.
Other considerations?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Russell.
I'm not, Commissioner Denson sent an email out to sort of the joint delegation that had that meeting with the school district about internet needs. And I haven't seen any response from sort of the executive branch of CCSD. I know I've heard that some hotspots have been ordered and they might be here in 3 to 4 weeks. But it's come to my attention that kids have started school today and not all of them have the internet. So I don't really know what this body is able to do without any communication sort of confirming what the plan is from the school district. I know we've heard from some school board members with some sort of policy ideas, but without any further guidance from the school district about how we can collaborate with them, I don't really see any way forward, unfortunately. I don't know if anybody else has some. Mayor, you might know something more than me. I don't know.
I know Manager Williams is regularly talking about some of the after-school support and, hopefully evolving to in-day support that we can provide for the district. And so, Blaine, if, in your conversations with CCSD's administration, you could get some sense of scale, I think that would at least allow us to craft whatever support we can provide with these dollars.
And I do support the solid waste surveillance testing. I think that's smart. The more testing we can do, the better. That's why I'm really happy to see some of that CARES Act funding go to entities in town that are going to do more robust testing as well. So, thanks.
And Mayor, I know Commissioner Denson had his hand up, but just to respond to Commissioner Link's and Edwards' points, I believe with part of the resiliency package, we did have, I think, $150,000 set aside for healthcare partnerships. And I think part of that was targeted towards a mobile health lab, but, it could be that those funds are readily accessible for these purposes. And certainly we can explore that further with Dr. Lip.
Great. Yeah, Tim?
Thank you. And to build on Commissioner Edwards' comments, I guess twofold. In the short term, I do continue pushing that. We work with CCSD. Again, I really feel like this probably just starts with us having somebody in the administration of ACC and or CCSD contact Spectrum, contact AT&T, have leadership from CCSD, have leadership from ACC, sit down with them and figure out what we can do in the short term just to make sure that we can ensure that students have internet access in their homes. My understanding of the hotspots, the new ones coming on, is that's funding coming from UGA, which is great. I'm glad to see that they're doing that, but I'm still just confused on why us, meaning ACC and CCSD, are not able to come forward with a funding plan to actually get some stuff happening there. Especially since we've been talking about this for weeks and honestly probably months. In the short term, I definitely back that, and I want to see that moving forward desperately. I think we're only going to hear about more problems with students. Today's only day one. I know online I heard from multiple different families that were having some struggles, and that's only going to continue as we go forward. And honestly, every day that we delay is a deeper hole that student has to try to work their way out of to be successful in this school year and every school year back beyond this. And again, it's not acceptable for us just to expect these students and their parents to sit out in a parking lot somewhere or even in a park. Somebody brought up a great point. Even with a Chromebook, if your school day is 8 hours and you have that Chromebook going on Wi-Fi with the screen up pretty bright because you're outside, you don't get 8 hours. So unless we're going to actually also have extension cords running around somewhere out in our parks and our parking lots, that is, again, not an acceptable solution. What is an acceptable solution is that every single house that has a need that is already wired into the infrastructure for internet have internet service through their home. For the long term, which Manager Williams brought up about the question of phase 2, potentially phase 3 of these CARES funding coming through, I do support us using a sizable amount of that funding to add into our TSPLOST broadband high-speed internet project that we have there. Again, this pandemic has only, I think we like to think of it as caused problems, but really what it's done is it's really just highlighted the inequities and disparities that we have in our community, especially around the internet. We're talking about here right now, students, CCSD students being affected by this. But again, we expect people to be able to apply for unemployment, for our JDA grant program, for people to be able to get on Zoom meetings for their jobs, be able to keep jobs, just to be able to connect to people because you're socially distanced. The internet is absolutely acceptable. It is a human right. And you think we have to start treating it that way. And we have this funding coming through. We already have the TSPLOST project there. I would like us to start to put together a bold, ambitious idea about how we can have a municipal ISP, either solely or teamed up partnership with a private entity, so that we can ensure that if a pandemic ever happens again, God, I pray that it doesn't, or any other kind of emergency, or just everyday life, we know that every single Athens-Clarke County resident has access to high-speed internet. So yes, fully support that.
Thanks, Tim.
And I did have one more question. If Manager Williams can expand on it, because we were talking about the sewage testing. Manager Williams, I know you sent out an email talking about, at least on the lower level of what we were doing. Could you speak to that at all, about what's already been done with UGA doing some of that sewage testing?
Yes, they started this on their own, and they were, I believe, doing both the North Oconee and Middle Oconee plants. The extra funding, Commissioner Link, I believe, would help to expand to the Cedar Creek plant as well, which serves the east side and is heavily residential. So that would also give us some indication as well. So, but I haven't seen Dr. Lipp's proposal, but she has been gracious enough to continue to update us, and I'll share those as I get them.
Mr. Mayor?
Are you following up on the sewer? Because I've got a couple other commissioners.
Oh, sorry. I wanted to follow up on municipal broadband, but I'll defer till later. Go ahead, everybody else.
Got Ovita and then Mariah.
I did speak to Rick Parker Friday, and they have what they have done is everyone in public housing who did not have internet access, they have worked a deal out with Spectrum for those families that the Housing Authority is going to pay for until December. And out of all of, and that's for people who did not have internet. So some families did. There were 6 families. Oh, I'm sorry. Stop. There were 6 families that had a past due bill, so they were not eligible for that assistance. So they're thinking about buying a box or something for them, but there were 6 families in public housing. They did not do Bethel Homes, but they did share the information with Spectrum, and he's also emailed it to me. It is the same suggestion I think someone made on our last meeting, and it is the $22 for families and elderly. So there is an agreement. That agreement is available, and I do have residents in the Pulaski Heights that is willing to help out with some of the families in Bethel. So there is an agreement with a private entity that if we would just know from the school district who does not have internet, we could be a little bit more targeted.
Thanks, Avita. Mariah?
Okay, got it. I caught myself before I started really going in. I think Tim took a lot of the words out of my mouth with regards to front-loading our TSPLOST plans regarding municipal broadband, with perhaps and supplementing that with perhaps some CARES funding in this phase 2. But I wanted to speak to that because I think it's important that when we talk about how to go about spending these funds, I think as Tim said, this pandemic has not just made problems worse, it's exposed underlying issues that have existed for a long time in our community. So when we think about how we want to spend these funds, we should be thinking about how we want what we want Athens to be in perpetuity once this is over, how to heal those rifts that already existed and start building some of the social fabric and infrastructure to help undergird that to prevent us hitting these lows in a future pandemic in the first place. And so, yes, to, seeing how we can start building up our infrastructure regarding municipal broadband so that, maybe will help us out some now and, make sure that we have equity in our school system and equity for families, not just the students, but also the parents that are trying to apply for jobs right now or trying to get, I saw a listing for some phone banking jobs that I was referring some of my unemployed friends to, but it requires an internet connection in order to do this work. And so making sure everyone has access to those opportunities as well as access to the information they need to keep themselves safe during this time. A lot of, watching these meetings, we talked about how so many more people are watching these now, but what if you can't? Because, one person is over here trying to do their homework and that's using up the whole broadband capacity. So yes, working on that issue now, but also building a future where we don't run into these issues again. I remember early on when we were talking about the resiliency package, I'm not sure if I was perhaps projecting hopefully into the conversation or if this did come up. As well, I'm not sure if the timing of this will work out, but thinking about things like food sovereignty with regards to making sure people can stay fed. Right now, they're relying a lot on food banks. And as I've talked about previously, instead of teaching a person to fish, we're giving a person a fish. And so thinking about how we can support that in our communities, particularly in these fall months where things like community gardens are still viable. Looking at, I don't know if it's under the same limitations as the indigent services funding that we had previously, but how we can build up things like expanding the community core program to have opportunities for people to not only gain employment now, but have skills that they can carry with them past the pandemic and be providing for their families so that we're not putting as much pressure on our nonprofit ecosystem in the future. And so I don't know, I don't have all the ideas myself. It's something I myself am trying to think through right now, but I want to encourage all of us to think about what kind of Athens we want to have on the other side of this. What kind of support do we want to have in place if another pandemic comes up and how we can use this funding to make that happen long term, as well as putting a Band-Aid on some of our short-term injuries under this crisis.
Thanks, Mariah. Russell, you want to follow up?
Oh, I'll do it later with our attorney. Thanks.
Sure. A couple things that I wanted to suggest. One, and Mariah, you kind of took kind of one of the phrases out of my mind, which is sort of the Band-Aid approach. And we know that we've got some very short-term, right now things that we have to take care of. What I would certainly hope for is that by the time we come to understanding of the funds that we have to expend, that we've got some analysis so we can define those underattended right now immediate community needs so that we can put a formal call out for fulfilling those needs. But then extending beyond those momentary needs, those Band-Aid things, I'm very much interested in seeing us create a permanent foundation with these dollars to the extent feasible. And I think the dollars that have already been spent on increasing capacity for broadband at community spaces and the dollars that could be coupled with the TSPLOST broadband project are examples of that. And one more that I'd like to suggest is that in thinking about our homeless population, we dive into the housing first prospects that places like Austin and other cities in the Southwest and Nashville have used. And so we think of something like buying a hotel or buying an apartment complex for efficiency housing so that we don't have to have the kind of short-term fixes going to housing that we know we've had to stand up by just renting hotel rooms, but in fact, we've got a permanent space for that kind of thing. So I hope that's something that the commission would find favor with.
Mayor, if I might,
Go ahead.
just to follow up with Commissioner Denson, and all of you may not know this, but I don't want it to seem like that our leisure service community centers are cold and you have to sit out in the parking lot. They actually, Leisure Services has been working on the remote learning center concept, or zone, I should say. And so, all the 15 leisure services facilities that have been outfitted here are being promoted as remote learning zones for the parents and the students of Clarke County School District. And so, they all range in size. Some can hold as little as 18 and as many as 100. The thing that the caveat is that for kids under 12 or 12 and under, they need to have somebody, an older sibling or a parent with them. Older than that, they're fine to work on their own. And our staff will enforce safety protocols, make sure people have masks, and then, and they'll be open during the school hours. So those are all, and of course we'll clean accordingly. I know we had 9 students over at the East Athens Community Center today, and so please spread that word. We'll continue to do it too, but it's not just sitting in the parking lot. They can come inside, and we can have a place for them.
Thanks, Blaine. I appreciate that clarification. And yeah, if commissioners could have information on the nature of those facilities, the places where there are indoor facilities, outlets and the like, I think would be beneficial for everybody to be able to push out to the community.
Follow up with that.
All right. Any other thoughts before we move on? All right. Thanks, everyone. Okay, Blaine.
Well, that's it for the COVID-19 update, and we can move on to the second item on your agenda tonight. And I want to thank Stephen Bailey, Assistant Public Works Director, Hillary Essig, and Ronnie Katrib for being on with us tonight to present to you.
All right. So we are looking at Jefferson River Road tonight.
All right, can you hear me? Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Let me share my screen. We've got a PowerPoint for you. Okay, so tonight's our second installment of our Athens-In-Motion project-specific work sessions. We'll have a few more of these for you over the next few months. Tonight's talk will compare sidewalks versus multi-use paths along Jefferson River Road. And I'll briefly run through the history of this project. I'll tell you a little bit about the public engagement that we've had so far, and then I'll turn it over to Ronnie Katrib to explain the different concepts and costs associated. So similar to Cherokee Road, we're really hoping to get your input on these concepts, which will be valuable feedback for the public as we move through the next phase of public engagement. At this point, I know each of you could probably just lead this part of the presentation on history of Athens-In-Motion, but I'll use this as a reminder that the AIM Commission has really been instrumental in leading the bike ped efforts here over the last year. And one initiative they focused on was to make sure that we put each of our potential projects through that lens of our complete streets policy. In the case of these sidewalk projects, that meant doing cost comparisons. So to determine feasibility of installing multi-use paths versus sidewalks at these locations. Last month, staff shared the alternative concepts with the Athens-In-Motion Commission, and after comparing costs and benefits, their recommendations to move forward with a multi-use path concept along Jefferson River Road. And we'll still be presenting both sidewalk and multi-use alternatives for you here tonight, so you can deliberate that as well. We're excited to see Jefferson River Road go through our newly updated public engagement process, which included an initial public forum and also an on-site walk audit, which Commissioner Denson joined us for. At that time, we were just looking at the sidewalk concept. So this was before the direction that was given to compare multi-use versus sidewalks at these locations. But the comments of the audit were positive in favor of the sidewalk, but the biggest request we received was actually for additional consideration for bicycles as well. So that echoes the sentiment from the Athens-In-Motion Commission. We'll have one more public engagement opportunity similar to Cherokee Road. With the help of GIO office, we'll have GIS story maps, a recorded presentation, an online survey, and also a phone line for resident questions about the project. And I'm going to turn it over now to Ronnie, who will talk you through the specifics of the Cherokee Road project concepts and then explain next steps.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you for having me with you this evening. Jefferson River Road Connectivity Project limits extend from Jefferson Road, also known State Highway 129, shown on the screen top left image, and ends at the intersection of Vincent Drive, shown on the screen bottom right image. Currently, pedestrians do not have safe crossings from the existing sidewalk on Jefferson Road to the existing sidewalk on Old Jefferson Road and Jefferson River Road. Providing connectivity in this location is included in all concepts that I will show in a minute following this slide. A couple images of Jefferson River Road corridor were shown, including 4 bus stops within the project limits. On the next slide, Athens-In-Motion context. In the project vicinity, we have funded projects including Vincent Drive. This is a sidewalk project that was approved through TSPLOST 2020. Complete street analysis will be performed for multi-use path comparison. Barber Street Bike Facility project. This is through TSPLOST 2018. Also, we have Chase Street Bike and Pedestrian Facilities preliminary engineering through GDOT TAP grant with 25 local match, and that is from the Intersection Improvement Program. Estimated delivery is the year of 2023 to 2024. Potential projects without identified funding includes Newton Bridge bike and pedestrian connectivity through tax allocation district between North Chase Street, Barber Street intersection, and Vincent Drive, Newton Bridge intersection. If that is not applicable, these projects could make a good TSPLOST proposals in the future. Old Jefferson Road Tier 2 pedestrian and Tier 3 bike facility projects, as stated in the AIM project list identified as project ID 33, is also in that vicinity and connects directly into Jefferson River Road project. On the next slide, we have Jefferson River Road sidewalk option. This option for a sidewalk extends a total of 4,300 feet of sidewalk network. Starting from existing sidewalk on Jefferson Road, crossing GDOT right-of-way, railroad tracks, and Old Jefferson Road, and connects with existing Family Dollar sidewalk with a series of ramps, crosswalks, and signal improvements. The proposed 5-foot sidewalk begins from existing Family Dollar sidewalk on Vincent Drive, connecting 4 existing bus stops on the east side of the roadway. Accessibility improvements are proposed on all 4 corners of Vincent Drive intersection. Controlled crossing, including rectangular rapid flashing beacons, or as known as RRFBs, with crosswalks are to be considered on Vincent Drive, Alice Walker Drive, and Ambler Road. These will be pending a warrant study by staff, and that will be done during preliminary design phase. 3 different sidewalk alternatives have been studied with cost estimates ranging between $1.11 million to $1.83 million. And the next 3 slides will be showing all these 3 different concepts with a typical section. The first sidewalk alternative is a 5-foot sidewalk over existing grade with cost estimate a little over $1.1 million. Advantages include low cost, less invasive than other options for sidewalk, minimal earthwork, and less tree impact. Disadvantages: no improvement to existing drainage facilities, minimal improvement to driveways, and does not accommodate bicycle traffic. On the next slide, we have the second sidewalk alternative. This is a 5-foot sidewalk with improved drainage ditch between sidewalk and travel lane, and with a cost estimate little over $1.8 million. Advantages include improved drainage for roadway and 8-foot clear zone used for improved safety. Disadvantages include acquisition of right-of-way. Walls will be necessary in areas increased tree impact, high utility impact, and does not accommodate bicycle traffic. On the next slide, we'll look at the third option for sidewalk. Third alternative, this is a 5-foot sidewalk with curb and gutter and a cost estimate of $1.76 million. Advantages include construction will be in current right-of-way, most effective drainage option for 5-foot sidewalk, and minimal acquisition for right-of-way and easements. Disadvantages include this is a most costly option for 5-foot sidewalk, and maybe this is not the most costly. It's a little higher cost than alternative one, and drainage easements will be needed, increased tree impact, higher utility impact, and does not accommodate bicycle traffic. On the next slide, this is the multi-use path alternative for Jefferson River Road, and mainly I will talk a little bit about the similarity. This is the same alignment that we were looking at the sidewalk. It starts from Jefferson Road all the way to Vincent Drive with improvements similar to the sidewalk. Multi-use path alternatives include removal of 200 feet of existing sidewalk on Jefferson River Road adjacent to Family Dollar, and that to be replaced with a multi-use path. 2 different multi-use path alternatives have been developed with cost estimate ranging between $2.48 to $2.56 million. On the next slide, this is the first multi-use path alternative, and this is the recommended alternative by Athens-In-Motion. Multi-use path here is a 10-foot multi-use path with a curb and gutter, and within 14 feet urban shoulder, and a cost estimate of $2.48 million. Advantages to this alternative: most effective drainage option for 10-foot multi-use path, more space for pedestrians and bicyclists, and less costly option for a 10-foot multi-use path when compared with the second option to be presented on the next slide. Disadvantages for this option. I'm sorry, Stephen. Yeah, disadvantages for this option include easements will be needed, walls will be necessary in areas, increased tree impact, and higher utility impact. On the next slide, this is the second alternative for a multi-use path. 10 feet multi-use path on a rural section with an improved drainage ditch, a cost estimate of $2.56 million. Advantages include improved drainage for roadway and accommodates bicycle traffic. Disadvantages: acquisition of right-of-way, walls will be necessary in areas, increased tree impact, high utility impact, some properties may be condemned, and most costly option for 10 feet multi-use path. On the next slide, this is the cost estimate for all alternatives shown here in the comparison table. And based on Athens-In-Motion recommendations for multi-use path alternative number 1, we're showing here a couple numbers showing the difference between sidewalk alternative 3, which is in the row that is dashed with the red line. And if we make the subtraction or calculate the difference between that and the first alternative for multi-use path, and that is in row number 4, the numbers for the difference using the sidewalk alternative are shown here. And based on Athens-In-Motion recommendation, alternative number 4 difference is in the amount of $718,500. We can move to the next slide. Funding strategy is based on Athens-In-Motion recommendation to move forward with a multi-use path, alternative number 1, estimated at $2.48 million. What you see on this table is the TSPLOST 2018 pedestrian Improvement Program will fund $1.761 million, and the cost difference of $718,500 will be funded by TSPLOST 2018 Bicycle Improvement Program funds. Remaining funds are shown here in each program. The Pedestrian Improvement Program will have approximately $7.4 million. These funds are planned for future Riverbend Road and Barber Street pedestrian and bike improvement, currently in concept development phase. Remaining funds from TSPLOST Bicycle Improvement Program will be in the amount of $3.35 million. This fund will be utilized to support Barber Street multi-use path and could be used for Riverbend Road improvements planned to be presented at a work session in the near future. On the next slide, and this is specific to Jefferson River Road, what's next for this project? Public engagement will be at the end of September, beginning of October. It will start with sending mailers out and setting up a storyboard and recording a presentation for the public to view, and then provide us with a survey or feedback if they wish to do so. TSPLOST committee review is scheduled for September 22nd. Concept approval agenda is also in queue for November 3rd. On the next slide, and this is a snapshot of the 4 Athens-In-Motion pedestrian and bike projects going through concept development. And as you see, on November 10, staff will be presenting Riverbend Road concept and alternatives. Following on January 12, we also be presenting Barber Street concepts and alternatives. Public engagement and concept approval agenda dates are also provided. Just want you guys to pay attention to this table, as we have provided updates to the original table you may have seen with Cherokee Road. And the difference here is that we provided 2 months cycle between each project to allow or to minimize confusion between these projects, and therefore we chose to have a gap of 2 months as the Athens-In-Motion voting starts at 0 day, and then the Athens-In-Motion and then the Mayor and Commission voting is about 6 to 10 weeks later. I'm sorry, 9 to 10 weeks later. And therefore, to minimize confusion, we have spread out these projects to allow for good public engagement and meaningful interaction with our citizens and Mayor and Commission as well. With that, we come to our to the end of the presentation, and we'll take any questions you guys have.
Thanks for that, Ronnie and Stephen. Melissa.
Yeah. So the difference between a sidewalk and a multi-use path is 100% width. I'd be interested in seeing some calculations on, slightly narrower multi-use paths, especially in, where we're not in an urban core. I mean, a 10-foot path certainly makes sense in the middle of town along the Greenway when you're in, extremely densely populated areas where a lot of commercial activity is also located. But I just wonder, the extreme high price of these multi-use paths, if it could be brought down a little bit, if say we went with an 8-foot path instead of a 10-foot path. Do you have any response to that?
And I'll bring Hillary Essig into the conversation here as well, with maybe talk a little bit more about standards for the multi-use paths.
Good evening. So the multi-use paths of 10 feet are typically recommended mostly because of if you have someone walking or you have them in a wheelchair, and then you also have 2 bicyclists going the same way down the road. It's true that it might not happen as frequently in some of our more rural areas, but that's why the 10-foot is the recommended width by engineering standards. And then I think from what I remember from the lawyers in Georgia, you have to have a 2-foot buffer and then your 8-foot actual concrete to be considered a multi-use path. But I just know from kind of the engineering and general NACTO standards that I look at, 10 feet is kind of the absolute minimum you want. I don't know about the cost differences between the 8 and the 10. I think that's probably situational based on impact with your retaining walls and your right-of-way.
Yeah, well, I'm also concerned about impact on property owners. This is a residential area. There are a lot of homes on Jefferson River Road, and I have a feeling we'd get, less pushback if folks were allowed to keep a little bit more of their yard. I feel like we're letting the perfect be the enemy of the good sometimes.
Thanks, Melissa. See Allison and Russell.
Hey, thank you. I really appreciate this presentation. I like the methodology that you guys are moving forward and spacing these out for us as we move along, and then updating based on what the previous vote is. So my question, which I don't think can be answered tonight, but if it can, I'm looking forward to that, is that in my mind, and Melissa, this might address some of what you're talking about with front yard being taken up. If we go with a curb and gutter multi-use path, then we're scooting the whole project closer to the road versus the amount of space that has to happen for the improved drainage ditch. And so my question is, since this is a stormwater improvement at the same time as the multi-use path, how much of this project can we do fund sharing or split costs, that really creative way that you guys have been using different buckets of money? So I like the curb and gutter. I would like for us to see what we can do with the multi-use path. I think that all property values improve with sidewalks, and it's also improved with curb and gutter. And I think that, again, we're doing things that are improving the whole environment out there for those who live there, those who own the properties, and those that are traveling on these paths. So if there's input now, otherwise, if we can just get a follow-up on how we might be able to use stormwater to help out.
Well, I can address that very briefly, Commissioner Wright. And I think that would be a great thing to talk about when we come to you in a couple of months with the level of service that you want to see for the stormwater utility. As y'all know, and I do appreciate you putting in the TSPLOST 2020 a small amount of money, and we'll be talking about the TSPLOST to continue to fund those live stream replacement projects that seem to be happening more and more. And so I think it's a great creative idea that you have. The question is where those additional resources would come from to help augment these projects. The stormwater utility fee itself has really been more for maintenance of the existing structures, although we did use fund balance that had accumulated over the years to deal with these emergency live stream issues that you subsequently augmented with some TSPLOST 2011 leftover funds as a bridge to get us to TSPLOST. That would be an expansion to begin to do augmentation with some of these projects for stormwater. Not a bad idea. It's just where those resources come from, and if you want to add that to the level of service for the utility.
And you say that in a couple months, we'll be having that as a work session discussion, which might align when this comes. Anyway, so you said that's in a couple months, Manager Williams?
Yes, ma'am.
We start talking about the level of service, because it seems like we keep having level of service stuff. So I guess I'll add this to what we need to learn about.
Yeah, thank you. And just for the public's benefit, if you'll allow me, what I mean by level of service. So the stormwater utility was created back in the mid-2000s, and there was an advisory committee that was put together that offered, I think, 3 levels of service. And that could be just the absolute minimum that needed to be done, or being a little more proactive, or actually going out and taking care of some issues on private easements and things like that. And these are all things that y'all hear about from your constituents on a continual level. We did that a couple of years ago. We started that discussion about the level of service, which we hear from you first. And once you tell us the level of service, then we go back and model the financial impact that has, and then come back to you. So it's not a one-time decision, it's an iterative back and forth. And we had that conversation with the Mayor and Commission a couple of years ago. And when we talked about level of service, the Commission at the time wanted to expand it slightly. and then with the live stream replacement, increase fees to help with those projects, but half it with SPLOST. In the end, none of those two ever materialized, and we felt like with the new commissioners, we needed to revisit that conversation and actually maybe bring you some financial sensitivities on the front end so you could see what the implications of that are. And so, staff continues to work with commissioners and residents about issues with stormwater. It's an ongoing thing, and it's not getting any better with climate change. And so we definitely want to engage you, give you all the information we can so that you can decide what level of service is appropriate and then share that where people's money is going towards those purposes.
Gotcha. Thank you. And I think at that time, too, we were trying to improve our communication about the stormwater by putting maybe like SPLOST signs where your pennies at work. We were also had moved to where when stormwater fees projects were being underway, people could see that sign. So when we get to where, I didn't see that on our retreat agenda, but I was hoping that we would be talking about SPLOST 2020 prioritizing. It seems to me that broadband and that stormwater, whatever element of that we can bring up to the top of the list, can help us with some of these decisions.
And it's the November work session when we'll be tiering SPLOST or have our first conversation about that. So we've got a dedicated session for that.
Gotcha. And then I saw that you said we're having another retreat in November. So will that be after that work section?
We haven't scheduled that yet, but I would anticipate so.
Yeah,
just getting the cycle.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
And I'll say, Commissioner Wright brings up an excellent point. The next logical step with SPLOST 2020 is tiering the projects. And so what that means is that we will try to program out the use of funds over the life of the SPLOST over the next 12 years or so. And then that's where projects are front-ended, and some are as you go, the more bucket-like projects. And again, Robert Cheshire is joining us next Monday. That's going to be his first order of business. And we, as the mayor said, we've got a November deadline to get that in front of you. So certainly, Commissioner Wright, at the retreat, any appropriate time, we'd love to hear your feedback on what's important now.
All right. See Russell and Tim.
Thanks. I do support multi-use paths. All my colleagues know, and I'll support it here as well. Manager Williams, are you going to be presenting something on November regarding bond financing for some of these emergency stormwater infrastructure needs?
Well, that was an idea that I think you had brought up, Commissioner Edwards, which is a good one. At this point, when you gave us the $2 million of 2011 excess proceeds for that eligible purpose, that has given us the breathing room that we need, I think, for the near future. But we need to be ready in case that does happen. I think the thought was that, and if the public listening thinks about it, these live stream replacement projects, what we mean by that is where a live stream goes under a road, and that's where you have a culvert or a pipe, if you will. And those pipes in the past were made of steel, galvanized, but still made of steel, which rust and collapse. And we're going back with concrete. And so that being the case, if it's under the road, then it is part of the transportation network. And so that TSPLOST may be a ready source of funding there as well. But yes, Commissioner Edwards, we could talk about a bond financing, which I would assume the debt would be serviced by the stormwater utility since it was for those purposes. And that would be another level of service conversation.
Right. I would like to see that. And, I would appreciate my colleagues' support on that exploration, because I really am reluctant to spend SPLOST funds repairing decrepit metal pipes that shouldn't have been put down to begin with. I'd like to reserve SPLOST funds for the real tangible improvement projects that get voters excited. Interest rates are low right now. We have a dedicated funding stream with stormwater fees. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to use bond financing for this very unglamorous infrastructure work that has to be done. Thanks.
So I think, Russell, the collapsed pipe doesn't seem so special to take the S of SPLOST. All right, Tim?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I definitely on this one support the multi-use path due to the pretty minimal cost increase, $718,000. Again, not just to get the bike infrastructure in there, but as Commissioner Wright brought up, this ends up being a pretty massive stormwater infrastructure improvement. And that's actually, from what I've heard from some residents on Jefferson River Road, one gentleman in particular I spoke with back during whenever we still actually talk to people in person, he brought up that he really didn't care too much about a sidewalk, but if we could do something about the stormwater in his yard, he was all on board. So I think the stormwater element here is actually going to bring on a lot of the people who might be somewhat hesitant that Commissioner Link brings up. I think they're going to be much more willing to get on board here. And I wonder if staff can bring up the page that says the Athens-In-Motion context that has the map on there, if that can be pulled up, which I think also just shows like a really exciting part of this project, which is the pretty massive connectivity that this project can do, connecting Old Jefferson Road, which is already a pretty large road and path for the cycling community.
Effectively a multi-use path on its own.
Kind of is, and which is also tiered in the bike ped master plan. That is actually a tier 1 pedestrian plan, if I remember correctly. It actually connects all the way from Whitehead Road to the Boulevard neighborhood, going over around somehow over the loop, which addresses one of the largest, I think, on at least on the west side, connectivity issues we have, which is that very sketchy part of Prince Avenue that goes over the loop there. That's very difficult and dangerous for pedestrians and cyclists both. But connecting that project to the Vincent Drive project, which is already now being funded through TSPLOST, connecting it to the likely Greenway expansion through the Holland Youth Sports Complex, hopefully through the TAD funding. So this is just a kind of, to me, it's a bit of a linchpin project. While it might be a small one, really connecting. Also, it's connecting some working class neighborhoods along Jefferson River Road and Vincent Drive to, well, might not be the best grocery store in the world, but to a place they can get groceries there at the dollar store. And also something for us to think about, those families up there, since School C doesn't exist, most of those families go to have their kids go to schools like on elementary school to Whitehead Road Elementary School. So this is a big piece that can actually connect a safe pedestrian cycling route to the school that these children go to. And there's a lot of kids that live in that area too. So I'm very excited about this and glad to see that AIM proposed the multi-use path. And I think it's a good recommendation here.
Thanks, Tim. And if you could leave this slide up, I think this does exemplify really for this commission as a leadership body, for staff as great support, and for the public who've supported TSPLOST and TSPLOST so overwhelmingly, exactly how much bang we get for those bucks. I mean, we'll have from Barber Street to the Jackson County line, safe access to exactly what you described, Tim. And because of the way that the TAD was drawn, that little stretch that basically goes along the edge of the country club there could be funded through the TAD, as well as everything going up Newton Bridge Road, getting all those families to safe access to groceries, to Holland Youth Sports Complex, and ultimately when the component of the Greenway network goes in, the Sandy Creek Nature Center right over the river there. So I think just a killer assemblage of connectivity that, what you are all bringing to this corner of the community, and I think is going to be replicated on the east side and so many other places. So really exciting stuff. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, I forgot to ask a quick one. If the engineer could help me understand, why all the crossings on Jefferson River Road? It'd be nice to have just a multi-use straight shot. What's the need for the crossing?
It's for the bus stops. There's 4 bus stops.
Oh, engineer Wright, thank you.
Well, thank you for the feedback. Yes, there are multiple bus stops, 4 of them, on the same side as the alignment proposed on all alternatives. And also there is a need during the walk. We noticed and we heard from everyone walking that, you know, concerns with speeds on the road. The posted speed is 40 miles per hour.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is this,
yes.
are these crosswalks, or are these where the path is crossing the road? I might be confused.
Yes, they are crosswalks.
Just
yes,
crosswalks.
Okay. All right, never mind.
No worries. Yes.
All right. Everybody good? All right, fabulous. Please enjoy your Tuesday.
I have one quick follow up.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Now that we're mentioning speeds on that road, what is the possibility of us getting the speed limit reduced on Jefferson River and Vincent Drive? We've had a couple fatal accidents actually on Jefferson River just in the past year or so. And these are residential roads. They're wholly populated with homes. Is that something we could bring before our legislators? Particular roads that are residential character, that we can lower these speed limits? 40 miles an hour means everybody's going 50 at least.
So we've got that 85th percentile norm that we have to bring to GDOT to gain the warrants to move the speed. Now, you know, we've kind of used as a pilot project Timothy Road to see the effectiveness of lowering the speed without the ability to radar and ticket. As a tool, and I don't want to speak for the engineers, there are plenty of them on this call, but part of what they've exemplified that I've certainly taken to heart is this notion that if you really want to manage the speed, you have to manage the physical contours of the road.
So maybe these crosswalks will help bring speeds down, and then we can lower the speed limit.
Blaine, I don't know if you or Stephen or Ronnie want to follow.
Sure. Well, and Mayor, you're right, and I think, you know, if the public's not aware, that's how speeds are set, and then we every 3 years send our list to GDOT, and they approve the radar permit for us to be able to enforce that. The commission can just summarily change the speed limit, like the mayor suggested, but we can't enforce the radar. I think, Commissioner Link, where you were headed, though, was perhaps trying to get the ability from the state for more local setting of that. But I think the mayor's right. It does really tie back to the radar permit and enforcement. You do have the ability to change them. We just wouldn't be able to enforce on those. So I think Timothy as a test case is a good way to see how that goes.
Well, I hope we can look at these roads out here next, because it's really bad. And it's been really bad with no sidewalks now. Hopefully people have safety now that we're getting sidewalks out there.
All right. Well, good work, everyone. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. Y'all have a good night.
Be safe.
Good night. Thank you.